All right, guys, this is the Meter 2 Plus, and if you were to ask me to build my dream meat thermometer from scratch, honestly, I think this would be it. You may recall earlier this year, I did a head-to-head smart meat thermometer review comparing my original meter probe to a bunch of new entries that have come on the market since I picked this up nearly 5 years ago. But despite being nearly the oldest hardware, the meter came ahead in a couple of categories. In particular, since it has Wi-Fi, it has the longest range versus options that don't include Wi-Fi. It has the best rated app store, not only the best rating on any app store, also the most number of reviews to help validate that other people are getting the same great experience that I've had. It was dishwasher safe, which in this day and age you think would be par for the course, but sadly that was not true. It was also the second thinnest design out of all the probes, meaning we're making a smaller diameter hole in our food, and most importantly, it brought this all together in the best overall user experience. That may not seem like a big deal, but you notice a common element across some of these probes is there's no other way of interacting with most of these devices outside a smart connected phone or tablet. And so the user experience of the app in terms of being able to get it to perform the job that we want, and features that Meter has, like the ability to take notes and go back in historical cooks and see what you did great on that brisket a year ago so that you can learn from your previous successes and avoid previous failures, made the Meter my top pick earlier this year in my smart probe battle. But maybe Meter was listening and paying attention to a few of the nitpicks that I had about my Meter probes, because there's a brand new sheriff in town. I think the Meter 2 Plus is nearly perfect. More on that nearly comment in a minute. But the Meter 2 Plus is building on a strong foundation. Everything that made the first generation amazing is a carryover into the Meter 2 Plus. That includes having unlimited range with Wi-Fi capability. It's waterproof, as well as the probe having a 24-hour battery life. But the team at Meter has improved on the three main nitpicks that I ran into. So my first nitpick with the original Meter sensor was the ambient temperature rating was limited to 572 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that sounds like a lot, but if you're cooking in something like what I'm regularly cooking in my Kamado Joe and you're searing a steak, it is really easy for the temperatures to quickly exceed 572 degrees Fahrenheit. And if I was doing a rotisserie picanha or something like that and wasn't paying attention, the flame started to flare up as the fat drips and renders, which is absolutely beautiful to the sights, the smells, and the sounds. But speaking of sounds, that often would trigger an alarm on my Meter probe, letting me know that I was at risk of causing damage to my probe. So I'm really happy to see that this has been addressed with the all-new Meter 2, is that it is made out of complete stainless steel. As you can see, the only part that's not stainless steel is that ceramic band. And that ceramic band is there so wireless signals can escape and communicate with your smartphone and your tablet. So the temperature rating now is all the way up to 932 degrees Fahrenheit, which not only opens up a bunch of options for direct grilling, it means I no longer have to guess where my steak is going to finish by removing my probe when I move into the sear to make sure that I don't overcook it. So my second nitpick with the original Meter, instead of the ambient sensor, was the internal meat sensor. So this previously had a rating maximum of 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And I don't often aim intentionally to be cooking food beyond 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but there are occasional briskets and pulled pork that are just not probe tender. And so as you start working your way up, 209, 210, 211, and you're waiting to get that final level of probe tenderness, the Meter alarm would start to send me notes saying, hey, you are at risk of damaging your internal sensor, and I would have to remove that. So gone are the worries. We now have all the way up to 221 degrees Fahrenheit on the internal sensor, paired with that 932 degrees Fahrenheit on the ambient sensor. And based on things that I cook like brisket and pulled pork, everything is done at 212, but now I don't have to get the interference from an app saying you're at risk of damaging your probe. I know that I can leave this in all the way until probe tenderness without doing any damage to my Meter probe. Third, I need to bring back out some of the probes from my review for this point, but there was a couple things that became nitpicks. They weren't originally nitpicks. The combustion ink also introduced the thought of multiple sensors. This is also something shared with the Meat Stick. In the Meat Stick app, when I did the review, this is something I absolutely loved, being able to see multiple different temperature sensors providing some insights to what's going on in my cook. This matters more often than you might think. If you were cooking something thin, like salmon, for example, or a really thin steak, having more sensors helps us get an accurate reading on what's actually going on inside of our protein. For me, what I'm more often cooking is something like a brisket, and depending on how you place your probe, once you hit the stall and you've got some of those intermuscular fats and hard tissue starting to break down, you'd occasionally get an unusual reading. For example, if the sensor was sitting right in a river of now rendering fat, it would throw some potentially confusing information our way. And so now with the Meter 2 Plus, we gain 5 internal sensors along with the ambient sensor for a total of 6 sensors. And I don't think there's a good way to show this on screen, but this is just 5 millimeters thin. In addition to being 30% thinner, the Meter team also added in a bunch of other useful features. So in no particular order, some of my favorites include fast charging. So if you're like me and you leave your probes outdoor year-round, the cold winter months can do a number on your batteries. And there's nothing more frustrating. You come out, you get ready to throw the probe in, and you find out you've got a dead battery and no charge in your probe. So now if we were to throw in a fresh battery within a couple minutes, we gain a few hours of cook time. So gone are the days of needing to wait overnight for charging. One of the things that Meter stood out in my test and was rated second best at the time is temperature accuracy. And this has gotten even better. So we are now down to 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit, ISO certified on all 5 sensors, and you get a certificate of authenticity showing the accuracy of our probe. So we have all 5 sensors calibrated within 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit with a resolution on the app of 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit. So now when you're sitting at the stall wondering what's going on, or the rest, why things are taking longer, what's going on, waiting for that 1 degree to change, you can actually see some of those finer adjustments that gives us better information on, are we almost to our internal temperature? Are we almost out of the stall? Are things gaining temperature, losing temperature? Whatever you may need for your particular cooking use case. Speaking of the battery, the Meter 2 Plus is also more efficient. Maybe it's an electric vehicle thing, but range anxiety is on everyone's mind. So while not battery related, how far away can we get from our probe is one of the most popular questions that I get regularly, which is why I ultimately ended up with a Meter block for myself, because I get the Wi-Fi connection. The block ties into my Wi-Fi, uploads it to the cloud, and whether I'm cutting grass, I'm at the gym, or I'm further away from my house beyond what any Bluetooth range can provide, the wireless capabilities of the Meter block or the Meter 2 Plus with Meter Cloud gives me the information no matter where I am. But for those who don't have Wi-Fi or perhaps want to rely on a Wi-Fi and cloud solution, Meter 2 Plus now comes with 5.2 codify Bluetooth, which means we can reach up to 3,000 feet away in a completely unobstructed, which I don't live in. And for those who live in the real world with obstructions, things like bricks, corners, windows, furniture, 100 feet on a Bluetooth solution. Last but not least, 2 more features. We'll get to the big one in a second, but there's also on the back magnets as well as a non-slip rubber pads. If we want to have it sitting on the kitchen counter, for example, and not get knocked off, slide off, and fall down to the ground, that's great. But for me, what I'm really excited about is the magnets, because for applications like my offset, for example, I can tuck this in a rain-safe area on the legs of my offset and make sure that I'm really close to my food so I don't have any of that potential signal interruption, and make sure that this is stored in a safe, easy to find place, free of any weather on something even like my offset. Now, on to the big one, which is a little bit more about why I'm so excited about the introduction of the 5 internal sensors along with the ambient sensor probe. In my review earlier this year, my 2 biggest wish list items for Meter, if they were watching, is thinner probe designs like Combustion Ink, which we now have, as well as the introduction of additional ambient sensors. Now, I may not know what the absolute right number of sensors are. I do know a couple things. One is too few. This may not be a big deal if we're cooking something like a ribeye steak. If it's a thinner steak, maybe 1 inch thick, we insert our probe and it is getting the temperature information from the conduction energy on our grill, and you have no problem turning out a perfect medium rare. I didn't realize the limitations of 1 internal sensor until cooking round cuts. So whether that be something like a pork tenderloin, beef tenderloin, or a larger prime rib roast, where my logic at the time was to go directly into the end. What I didn't know is that this particular placement on a single probe, we have to wait for the outer cooking to make its way all the way down to the bullseye, the center of that round roast, to read a medium rare. But during the rest, I would see crazy temperatures, like 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit gained during the rest, which is 5-6 times more than what I might see on a ribeye steak. And that's because the placement right in the bullseye isn't able to account for the gradient of temperatures going all the way through a thicker round cut of steak. And so by including additional sensors, the app was able to help us find where the true lowest spot is, as well as take into account the speed at which temperature is building into our larger cuts to make sure that I don't repeat my sins of a couple years ago and absolutely overcook my Christmas tenderloin roast. In addition to helping solve the puzzle of things like round roast, one of the things I look forward to testing in the future for my full-fledged review, if you haven't been around the channel before, please like and subscribe to catch future videos, but I often like to review products over 6 months of time. So I will be doing my complete in-depth review in the weeks and months to come versus trying to fit that all into the video today. But some of the other features that I want to validate that the multi-sensor design actually helps afford or bring to the table is on smaller cuts like salmon, for example, or brisket, where I mentioned earlier, what if our probe was sitting in that pocket pool of rendering beef tallow inside and we were getting confusing information in terms of what's actually going on with our food outside of perhaps that little fat store inside our thick cut of beef. So these are all questions to be answered on, does 6 sensors solve some of those problems that I ran into before, like on round roast? Now, 6 sensors, good, bad, and different. You know, I don't know. I know 1 is not enough, and I know on the extreme end 100 is too many. But if I put a little chart up here on features, benefits versus simple and complex, the quadrant that I hope that all of these features and benefits combine into is providing the most amount of benefit with the greatest level of simplicity. I'm not sure that my brain could translate and make sense of something in that extreme example if we were to go to 100 sensors. More is not always necessarily better in the world of tech, despite what marketing teams try and tell us every year to get us to upgrade things like our smartphone. If I use smartphone cameras as an example, there's a lot more that goes into the quality of our pictures. Things like lenses, the sensor size, and how that's all processed and brought together can have a greater impact than just the megapixel count alone. Speaking of technology, in the early 2000s, I used to work at Hewlett-Packard, and in 2011, HP introduced their competitor to Apple's iPad, the HP touchpad, which on paper was green check marks behind almost every spec imaginable, yet somehow it all came together. It just didn't work. And shortly thereafter, the news headlines were reading about HP writing off nearly $1 billion in the business. The product flopped, and it makes lists like Forbes top 10 biggest business fails of all time. Interesting read, perhaps for another day, but this is just proof that specs alone don't necessarily equate to consumer benefits, particularly in how they're brought together for humans, us as consumers, to interact with them. And last but not least, this is top of mind. The weather is quickly turning here where I am, and so it was time to go get some new tires, but I couldn't help but laugh as the sales team was going through the list of specs, including things like speed ratings on the tires that I was putting on my truck, which has a speed limiter holding it to a maximum speed of 105 miles an hour, and the tire salesman was positioning tires with 165 mile an hour speed rating. Not a lot of benefit to me as a consumer for a tire that can go 65 miles an hour beyond the capability of my vehicle. And so bringing that all back into the Meter 2 Plus and the things that I'll be aiming to test in the coming months is what are these marketing benefits and claims and features outside of the ones that I've already been able to test leading up into today's video actually translate into consumer benefits. So if you remember at the beginning of the video, I said the Meter 2 Plus was nearly the perfect thermometer. Don't worry, I didn't forget. What are some of those things where I think there could be perhaps some improvement? First, as impressed as I am with the Meter 2 Plus, I can't help but wish there was a version of my block with the same technology. Now, I know the block use case may perhaps be more limited or exclusive to people like me with YouTube channels where I'm cooking multiple things all the time. Not many people are doing 3 or 4 briskets like I've done in my comparison videos, or doing several several steaks. But I have friends with larger families that are cooking more than one steak at a time, and I can't help but wish there is, or perhaps will be in the future, a block edition with all the same great tech in the Meter 2 Plus. Speaking of tech, one of the things that the team calls out in the Meter 2 Plus is that long-range coded PHY Bluetooth. This is the technology that helps make possible that 3,000-foot range, or in a heavily obstructed household environment with walls, bricks, concrete around corners, furniture, everything like that, 100 feet. That's a technology platform not yet supported by all phone manufacturers. A couple Android phones offer this, but as of my knowledge up to today, brands like Apple phones, for example, which according to some research articles make up nearly half of the entire smartphone market, don't yet support coded 5.2 Bluetooth. And a quick Google search, I wasn't able to find any documentation or articles saying when it's coming. And so if you're like me and you're in the iOS ecosystem, this benefit of extremely long range on Bluetooth without relying on Wi-Fi means we're just gonna have to wait. Thankfully, this is Wi-Fi enabled and I have unlimited range, but for people who have an iOS device and don't want to use Wi-Fi, sadly, you're gonna need to wait a little bit longer. So good job, Team Meter. You've managed to make an already great product thinner, more efficient, able to use it in more extreme temperatures, whether it's direct grilling or getting that perfect probe tenderness on my internal temperatures like pork, brisket, and more easy to use for the consumer to help find that perfect temperature by introducing additional sensors. I have to say, after having hands-on for just a couple weeks in advance of the launch today, when the embargo is clear and we're able to start talking about our hands-on experience with the Meter 2 Plus, I am really impressed. And I can't wait to get even further hands-on experiments over the weeks and months to come. Make sure, again, you like and subscribe so you're alerted when those come out. But that's it for today. I'm James from Soak That Barbecue, signing off.